한 15분만 있다가 문 열니까
응? 응? 응?
화장실은
저거 엠파이어야?
계단
아니야. 여기 있는데 뭐.
왼쪽에 있습니다. 그래서 15분만 있으면 문 열니까 줄 서서 기다리니까 화장실 안 열고요.
화장실은
15분만 있으면 여기 올라가서 물고기단을 모셔도 되고 저쪽에 여기 또 횡단보도 뺐으면 이쪽에 왼쪽으로 왼쪽으로 맥도날드인데요. 그리고 횡단보도 밖에 잡으면
We're going to go out into the harbor. We're going to kind of cruise around Manhattan now, and we're going to have a wonderful view of the Statue of Liberty. You're going to get some great photos. When we get out there, everybody be calm because we're going to stop the boat right in front of the statue. So you'll be able to move around and get as many pictures as you want, so no rushing. Everybody be cool, okay? Our captain today, his name is Adonis, and we have Mehedi and Chris as our crew members, and we have a full bar in the back. Sandra has the bar. She's a great bartender, and she's got cool drinks and hot drinks and souvenirs and snacks, so if you need anything at all, you can see Sandra in the back, okay? Now, we're on the East River. Right now, this is the East River, and we're along, we've just left Manhattan Island, and we're going to go around the tip of Manhattan over to the Hudson River. That's up to about the World Trade Center, and then go over and out to the harbor itself. Now we're going to pass Wall Street in just a minute over here on our right side. You see the white brick building right here. Next to the white brick building there's a black glass building with white vertical stripes. In between those two buildings, that is Wall Street. Wall Street got its name because in 1653 the Dutch, who were here in New Amsterdam, they built a wooden wall right here. This was the northern edge of the city, and the wall was to protect them because they thought that the British up in the Connecticut area were going to try to invade, because this was during the first Anglo-Dutch War. Oh, someone just boosted the volume a little bit. And anyway, there's Wall Street right in there. And this is within walking distance of the seaport. If anybody, most of you are with groups, I know that, but hopefully they'll take you over to see Wall Street. It's really quite something. You see the New York Stock Exchange. You can see where George Washington took his oath of office as our first president, because New York was the first capital of the U.S. from 1789 to 1790. We were the first capital of the U.S. So we're just passing Wall Street, and we're moving downtown. And over here, coming up ahead of us, there's a heliport. It's the largest heliport in New York City. And there's a big helicopter sitting out there on the heliport right now. And this is where President Obama lands when he comes to visit us. President Obama comes in three or more, sometimes it's more than three, but several helicopters, and nobody knows which helicopter the president is in until he steps out of it at the heliport. And we do this for all dignitaries, any heads of state, the Pope or the Queen, anybody who comes to visit New York. We send them over to Manhattan from the airport with helicopters. And that's because we don't want them to sit in city traffic trying to get into the city. It's very difficult. If you've ever come from the airport into Manhattan, it can be very difficult. So dignitaries get to come over by helicopter, and they land up here. They're right here, and then they make big traffic jams here in Manhattan for us. Now Manhattan Island is about 12 miles long. The island of Manhattan is only about 12 miles long, and at its widest part, it's about 2.5 miles wide. And our population today, there's about 1.6 million people that call Manhattan home. And then each workday, Another about 1.5 million come in here, they commute in here to work. So our population goes to about 3 million, a little over 3 million. And then each week we get a lot of visitors. Sometimes we get more than 1 million visitors a week here in New York City. So we get about 4 million or so on the island of Manhattan. We make it all work somehow because we're New Yorkers, you know. And actually it's not so bad. It used to be more crowded, you know, in the beginning of the 1900s, the early part of the 20th century, when there was so much immigration happening here. We had over 2 million people living on the island of Manhattan at the time. So it's a lot less, even though the buildings are a lot taller today, it's a lot less because we live in more rooms. We take up a little more space, I guess. A lot of the people that came here in the beginning of the 20th century, they lived in small tenement apartments, 10 to a room sometimes. So, you know, this we've got a little more elbow room now. Now, pulling out in front of us, there's a white boat that's just pulling out in front of us here. This is why we've slowed up. And it just left this ferry terminal here where you see the pink arches, this yellow building with the pink arches. This ferry terminal is from 1909. It's called Battery Maritime Terminal. And this boat, this is the ferry boat that goes to and from Governor's Island. And it's a free ferry boat. You do get some things for free in New York. One of them is a ferry ride here from Lower Manhattan. Actually, there's 2 ferry rides here from Lower Manhattan, and they're both free because the other one is next to the Battery Maritime Terminal. We have South Ferry Terminal, and right there, and that big orange boat that's out there now, down by the going by the Statue of Liberty, right near the Statue of Liberty down there, that's the Staten Island ferry boat. That's also a free ferry boat. And 65,000 people a day rely on that boat. They cross the harbor to get to Manhattan. And Staten Island is part of New York City. Most people, when they come here the first time, they spend most of their time on Manhattan Island because it's where a lot of the landmarks are. But people who return visitors, or some people who are just interested more in really historic sites, might take the boat out to Staten Island because there's a lot of history, and there's 5 areas that make up New York City. We have Manhattan Island, we have Staten Island, we have Brooklyn, we have Queens, we have the Bronx, and even the Queens and Brooklyn are on islands. The only part of New York City that's not on an island is the Bronx. The Bronx is mainland USA. We are a city made up of islands. Very much like Venice is made up of islands. We kind of think of ourselves as the Venice of North America. I know a lot of people don't buy that, but we can make it work if we want to here in New York because we're New Yorkers. So here's South Ferry Terminal. And this is the southern tip of Manhattan right now, and we're going to head on to the Hudson River. Now, the Hudson River is named after a British explorer, Henry Hudson. He discovered this area in 1609 while working for the Dutch West India Company. And he thought he had found a shortcut to trade with Asia. What he really thought when he saw this river is that he thought he was going to be able to, it was so big, he thought he would be able to sail right up the river, over the North Pole, and down into China. That's what he thought would happen. But the river's only 315 miles long, so it didn't really work. But the Dutch came back in 1624. They dropped off some settlers on Governor's Island. Those settlers stayed on the island for about a year, and then they moved across the water, and they moved on to Manhattan Island, and they created the city of New Amsterdam. And New Amsterdam, of course, became New York once the British took over in 1664. Now, here on the side of Manhattan right now, we have Battery Park. Battery Park is where you go if you're going to take the boat to the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. And you get that boat right up there by the white tent, and right next to the white tent you can see over here on the right side of the tent there's a red building. It's a circular building, a red sandstone building. It's a fort. It was built for the War of 1812. It's called Castle Clinton. And then after the War of 1812, for a while it was an entertainment complex, and then in 1855 Castle Clinton was turned into our first immigration station here in New York City. And from 1855 to 1890, 8 million people came through Battery Park and Castle Clinton on their way to a new life in America. Then in 1890, the federal government took over immigration completely, and it was moved over to Ellis Island. And we're going to talk more about Ellis Island when we get out into the harbor, because we're going to go right by Ellis Island as well. But immigration began here in 1855 in that red sandstone building you see by the white boat there. And that is one of the statue cruises that's going out to the island. Now, Lower Manhattan, there's a lot to do down here in Lower Manhattan. There's an awful lot to see because this is the oldest part of the city, and it's got Wall Street, it's got all sorts of things, it's got several museums. On Wall Street, there's the Museum of Finance, and then right here around Battery Park, there's 3 museums, all very good. One is right across the edge of the park. See that building over there? There's a building with a red and green roof. That is a customs house from 1906, and that building houses the Museum of the Native American, which is a free museum run by the Smithsonian Institute. And it's a fascinating museum, and the building itself is one of the greatest Beaux Arts buildings in New York City. It rivals Grand Central Terminal in being one of the best buildings of that era. And it's quite a magnificent building. It was designed by the architect Cass Gilbert, who also did the Woolworth building. We will see the Woolworth building towards the end of our tour as well. And then we have here at the edge of Battery Park, we have a building. This was built as the Harbor Master's office in 1886, this little gray building with the pointed tower. And the clock in that pointed tower was installed in 1919. It was the first World War I memorial in the United States. It's right here. So this building is under extensive restoration work today. We expect it to open sometime this summer, to reopen. And we're very excited by that because it's taken a very long time. You know, we have to preserve it. It is a landmark, and so it's just taken a while to figure out exactly what to do with it. Now, as we move past the edge of Battery Park, there's a couple more museums right up here in this area we call Battery Park City, which is right above Battery Park. And right here on the water, we have this unusual shaped pavilion, this building right here. This is the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Very, very powerful museum. And then across the street from it, there's a hotel. And in the ground floor of that hotel is the Skyscraper Museum. And anybody who might be interested in learning more about our skyscrapers and how our city grew over the decades and the centuries, this would be the place to go, the Skyscraper Museum. There's some excellent exhibits about how these things were done, and some wonderful exhibits also dealing with the original World Trade Center, and it's really quite fascinating. Now this land here, this land that we're alongside of right now, this was not part of the original island. This is all landfill, and the island was built up over the years by landfill. Some of the landfill here in Battery Park City, because this is the newest part of the island, some of this landfill came from the construction of the original World Trade Center. About 24 acres of this area of the city comes from the original World Trade Center construction. And in just a moment, we'll be alongside the World Trade Center, and I'll be able to show you where the Twin Towers stood. Right now, you should be able to see, yes, a very tall building under construction over here on the right front of the boat. This is World Trade Center number 1. Under construction today. This building, when it's finished, it will be about 400 feet taller than the original Twin Towers. It will be 1,776 feet tall. In terms of meters, it is somewhere in the area of 541 meters. It's a little more, I think, than that, but it's close to that. Now, over here, as we start to move up the river just a little more, there's an open space, an open sky coming into view just in here. See that right in there? It just came into view over here on the right. That is where World Trade Center number 2 stood. The South Tower, number 2 of the Twin Towers. It was the first building to collapse on 9/11, and you would have stood right in that empty space. Now, Tower 1 of the Twin Towers, the South Tower, that stood just opposite the glass dome you see between the 2 buildings over here. It was just opposite that. That glass dome is called the Winter Garden of the World Financial Center. It's a public space. The World Financial Center was designed by the architect Cesar Pelle, and these buildings opened, I guess there was about a decade from the World Trade Center to these buildings. These buildings were heavily damaged on 9/11. In fact, most buildings here in Lower Manhattan sustained heavy damage from 9/11 because the debris from the falling Twin Towers shot out. It traveled 6 to 10 blocks. It covered a radius of 6 to 10 blocks. It was like setting off a megaton bomb down here. It was just unbelievable. And so the damage to these buildings was quite extensive. It took a year or more to repair them and get them ready to be used once again. The other building under construction right now over here, this is World Trade Center number 4. The buildings for the new World Trade Center buildings are being built around the perimeter of the 9/11 Memorial, which is a beautiful memorial to all of the people we lost on September 11th, which incorporates the actual footprints of the Twin Towers. Each building was almost a full acre square. And they've been transformed into these incredible reflecting pools, these giant reflecting pools, a full acre square, 30 feet deep. They're called reflecting absence. And all of the people we lost on 9/11 are inscribed around them, not just the casualties from New York, but the people who died in Washington, D.C. that morning, the people who were also killed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania that morning. And then there were 6 people that were killed here In 1993, there was a terrorist bombing in the World Trade Center in 1993. 6 people died in that bombing. The memorial to them was destroyed on 9/11, so they have been incorporated into this memorial today. It's a beautiful memorial. Hopefully you will all get a chance to see it while you're here. They really did a wonderful job on this memorial. So World Trade Center number 1, when it's finished, it's going to be the tallest building in New York City. Today, that title is currently held by the Empire State Building from 1931, and there's the Empire State Building up ahead of us. The Empire State Building opened in 1931. It was actually the tallest building in the world when it opened, and it held that title for about 40 years until the Twin Towers opened down here, and then the Twin Towers became the tallest building in the world for about 3 years in the 1970s until the Sears Tower opened in Chicago. But here's the Empire State Building over here, and you can visit it, go up to the observation decks on the 86th floor, the 102nd floor. You get magnificent views of New York City. You can see almost everything in New York City from the top of the Empire State Building. The one thing you cannot see is the Empire State Building itself. If you want to see that in a view, you have to go to a place like Top of the Rock, and then you get to see the Empire State Building. So as I said, this area we started as a Dutch colony in 1624, and then for 40 years we were a Dutch colony, and this entire area was known as New Netherlands. And then in 1664 the British came and they took over, and not a shot was fired because the city surrendered. The Dutch surrendered without a shot being fired, mostly because the merchants who were here were afraid that war would be bad for business, because New Amsterdam had become a thriving international trading port. At that point there were somewhere between 18 and 20 languages being spoken here. Today there are about 65 languages. We've still retained that international influence here in New York City, and in fact also New Amsterdam was started as a for-profit venture, and we still retain that today in New York as well. We're very much a for-profit venture still, the city of New York. Anyway, when the British took over, they divided the colony in two, and they used the Hudson River as the dividing line, and they created New York, which is now on our left side as we've turned the boat, and New Jersey over here on the right side. So this is New Jersey today. And this area of New Jersey where you see all these nice buildings, this is Jersey City, but we call this the Jersey Gold Coast. And it was named the Jersey Gold Coast by the real estate industry because a bunch of years ago this area was in very bad shape. It was very run down and shabby and dilapidated, and the real estate industry thought that if they gave it a new name, maybe they could get some big investors to start building some fancy new buildings. So they started to call this the Jersey Gold Coast, and their plan worked. So we have all these beautiful new buildings, and at the end of the Jersey Gold Coast, there's a very tall silver tower up here at the end. This last building, this was built for the Goldman Sachs Company. It was designed by the architect Caesar Pele, who also did the World Financial Center over in Lower Manhattan. And this building, tallest building in New Jersey, it's 781 feet tall. And here it is up at the end of the Jersey Gold Coast. And then next to it, those of you here on the right side of the boat can already see it, there's that big clock next to the Goldman Sachs building. It says Colgate on it. The Colgate Company had their headquarters in New Jersey for many, many years. They didn't move out actually until the 1980s. But in 1906, they created a big clock, a 50-foot diameter clock, to celebrate their 100th anniversary and to commemorate the first Colgate product, which was called Octagon Laundry Soap. So this clock you see here is actually not the original one. That was 1906. This one is from 1924, but it is a replica of that original clock, and it sits over here on the water, right on the site of where the Colgate Company used to have a manufacturing plant. And so it's the Colgate clock, and let's see, have they, you know what? They remembered daylight savings time. They often forget to wind the clock. It's often not even keeping the correct time, but obviously they got it right this morning. So we're going to go past the Colgate clock. We're going to go out into the harbor now. We're headed down there to the Statue of Liberty. Now the New York Harbor, this was the place, this was the #1 place for immigration in the U.S. in the beginning of the 20th century. Everybody wanted to come to New York, and more people came through here than all the other port cities in the United States combined. This was the #1 place. So between 1892 and 1924, it was about 12 million people came through the port of New York on their way to a new life in America. And so what they would do is they would go through Ellis Island, but then if they weren't staying here in New York, they would be taken to a train station. The train station is up here. Up on the right now, there's a little red brick Victorian building up there. And that's the Central Railroad of New Jersey terminal. And it's there they would catch trains that would